Pay rent or get out." The words hit harder than the truck that had put me in the hospital. My father stood at the foot of my bed, his face burning red with rage while the stitches in my body were still fresh and the pain medication barely dulled the fire in my ribs. When I told him no, his hand struck my face with such force that I crashed to the floor, the taste of blood flooding my mouth as something in my chest cracked. "You think you're too good for this family?" he sneered. But he had no idea what was coming. "My name is Quanah Graves. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how my own father tried to destroy me at my lowest, and how his greed became his downfall." The accident had happened 3 days earlier. A drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my car. The doctor later told me I was lucky to be alive. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, 27 stitches across my forehead, bruises dark enough to make it look like I'd gone 10 rounds in a boxing ring. Meanwhile, the other driver's insurance company claimed I was partially at fault, even though I'd been stopped at the light when he hit me. But to understand what happened next, you need to understand my father, Donald Graves. He never saw me as his daughter. He saw me as a source of income. After my mother died when I was 14, I was expected to pay my own way. It started small, lunch money earned from babysitting. By 18, I was covering my college expenses while still living at home. By 25, I was paying 80% of the household bills while my father spent freely on his new wife, Barbara, and whatever get-rich-quick scheme had captured his attention that month. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and quiet despair. The nurse who saw him strike me suddenly discovered an urgent task at the other end of the ward. That was my father's gift, an ability to make people look away. He stood 6'3", built like a former linebacker, his hands hardened by 30 years of construction work before a conveniently timed back injury placed him on disability. Strangely, that injury never bothered him during his weekly golf games. Barbara hovered behind him, clutching a counterfeit designer purse she'd bought using a credit card opened in my name, something I would only discover later. She gave a nervous, high-pitched laugh every time my father raised his voice. My brother Jake leaned against the doorframe, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up. At 26, he still lived in his childhood bedroom and still owed me $5,000 from a failed cryptocurrency investment. He had promised monthly payments. That had been 14 months ago. In the hallway stood my father's new girlfriend, Tiffany, 22, freshly graduated from beauty school, endlessly chewing gum and checking her reflection in her phone. She seemed completely detached from the scene, or perhaps simply uninterested. While my father raged about rent for the room I had been paying for since I turned 18, he remained blissfully unaware of my secret. He didn't know about the late nights, the careful planning, the project I had been building quietly for years. To him, I was nothing more than his struggling daughter, a marketing coordinator barely holding her life together. My boss had already warned me that missing more work would cost me my job. 3 days in the hospital had apparently exceeded their limit for compassion. The rent was due on the 1st, my father reminded me. It was the 3rd. On the 1st, I had been unconscious. On the 2nd, I had been fighting for my life. On the 3rd, he wanted $800 for a bedroom in the house my mother had helped pay for, a house that somehow became entirely his after her death. When I suggested that his daughter's health might matter more than his rental income, he struck me. I hit the floor, my IV tearing loose as alarms screamed from the monitors. No one came. Barbara laughed nervously. Jake smirked. Tiffany blew another bubble. "You've got 3 days," my father said coldly. "Pay up or get out." Mrs. Chen, our neighbor, happened to peek inside just then. She had brought yellow roses, my mother's favorite. She saw me bleeding on the floor and tried to help, but my father stepped between us. "This is family business," he told her. She left the flowers and hurried away, her expression saying everything she could not. 3 days later, I was discharged with painkillers and instructions to rest. My father allowed Jake to pick me up, which meant enduring his complaints about gas money the entire drive home. He even demanded $10 when he dropped me off. I gave him $5. The other $5 would have to cover my bus fare to physical therapy. The house felt different when I returned, colder, unfamiliar. Tiffany had moved in completely. Her belongings filled the living room. Her products crowded the refrigerator. A sign on the bathroom door declared it, Tiffany's Glam Room. Barbara sat at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, credit card applications she quickly covered when she saw me. I caught a glimpse of my social security number before she hid them. She asked how I felt. I said nothing and went to my room. That was when I saw the padlock. Not on the door, on my closet. Inside were my work clothes, my computer, my documents, everything I needed to survive. A note was taped to the lock. See Donald for key, rent first. The next morning, after physical therapy, I returned to find the house locks changed. My key no longer worked. When Tiffany finally opened the door, wearing my silk robe, she casually informed me that I didn't live there anymore. Inside, my family was already planning to rent out my room to someone else. You had 3 days, my father said simply. That night, sitting in Mrs. Chen's garden shed with $300 in my pocket and nowhere else to go, I made a decision. I would learn exactly what my father had done, every lie, every theft, every betrayal. And I would make him pay for all of it. The pawn shop owner turned out to be a kind Korean man who remembered my mother well, and who had a deep, personal hatred of thieves. That alone made him willing to help. My father, meanwhile, tried to recover his losses by renting out my old room on Airbnb. The plan didn't last long. I reported the listing for health and safety violations that were easy to prove. The window I'd broken to get inside was still shattered. The smoke detectors didn't work. Mold spread across the bathroom walls, clumsily hidden beneath fresh paint. And when I mentioned to the city inspector that my father had proudly bragged about never pulling permits for his do-it-yourself renovations, the inspection became extremely thorough. Tiffany's evidence proved even more valuable. She had recorded my father coaching his newest girlfriend, Ashley, on how to apply for credit cards using her mother's identity. She filmed him rehearsing his disabled walk before medical appointments, only to forget the act and stride normally to his truck minutes later. She captured screenshots of him selling prescription pills obtained for his fabricated back pain. But my favorite discovery was accidental. For 8 years, my father had been claiming Jake as a dependent on his taxes, even though Jake had moved out at 21 and had been filing independently ever since. The revelation meant tax fraud for both of them, and Jake hadn't even known. When he found out, he turned on our father with breathtaking speed. On a Wednesday morning, Richard Hoffman filed the trust fund lawsuit. My father was served at his golf club, in front of all his friends. The suit demanded repayment of the $1.5 million life insurance policy, plus interest and damages, and formally accused him of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of trust assets. Even Randy, his longtime golf partner and accomplice in tax evasion, received an unpleasant surprise when the IRS arrived at his used car dealership. Helping someone commit fraud makes you part of the conspiracy. His wife was particularly furious when she learned about the cash he'd been hiding during their divorce. The disability investigation moved quickly. Investigators compiled footage from the Safe Driver app, Tiffany's recordings, and my father's own social media posts, evidence of him walking, lifting, and working while claiming he was bedridden. The agency calculated he owed $230,000 in fraudulent payments, not including penalties. While his world collapsed, mine was expanding. My online consulting business flourished. Word spread quickly about the woman who could trace hidden money and expose financial fraud. Within weeks, I was booked 3 months in advance. I raised my rates twice and still had to turn clients away. I also began documenting my experiences anonymously online. A post titled "How to Survive Family Financial Fraud" went viral, shared thousands of times. The advertising revenue alone covered the rent on my new apartment, a bright 2-bedroom with a balcony where Mrs. Chen could visit without fear of my father's threats. My father's empire was collapsing piece by piece. He called constantly, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between threats, desperate pleas, and broken sobs. I saved them all as evidence for the restraining order I would soon obtain. He tried liquidating assets, but his accounts were frozen. He attempted to borrow money, but his credit was destroyed. His newest girlfriend abandoned him after discovering my blog online, ending the relationship by text while he sat in a bankruptcy lawyer's office. The trap wasn't just closing, it was slamming shut. 6 weeks after the hospital incident, everything unraveled at once. On a Monday morning at 9, IRS agents arrived with a seizure notice. Mrs. Chen watched from across the street and gave me a running commentary over video call. They took my father's new truck first, the one purchased with my mother's trust fund money. He tried to claim it was medically necessary for his disability, but the agent simply laughed and pointed to the lifted suspension and racing stripes. Soon everything in the house was tagged for auction: the boat, the jet skis, the home theater system, even Barbara's inventory of essential oils. She wasn't there to protest. She was already in county jail, unable to post bail after their accounts were frozen. Her lawyer contacted me about a plea deal. I told him I would consider it. We both knew I wouldn't. The trust fund lawsuit triggered a formal investigation into my mother's death. Authorities reopened the case after reviewing the insurance documents and suspicious timeline. When my father attempted to destroy evidence, they already had access to the safe, thanks to Tiffany. They discovered documents I hadn't even known existed. Jake cracked under pressure, facing his own fraud charges. He agreed to testify. He admitted to hiding assets, assisting with the disability scheme, and helping conceal the stolen trust funds. He also revealed something new: my father had maintained a second family in Florida for a decade, sending them money while claiming them as dependents on separate tax filings. That revelation brought federal investigators into the case. What began as a family dispute became a nationwide fraud investigation. Then the story went public. A local reporter who had witnessed the golf club arrest published an exposé. She interviewed Mrs. Chen, former co-workers, and Tiffany, who appeared on camera in full makeup wearing my mother's pearl necklace, the one I had recovered and given to her in gratitude. The headline spread rapidly: "Local man defrauds dead wife's trust, leaves injured daughter homeless." National media picked it up. My blog traffic exploded overnight. My father attempted damage control with a radio interview, claiming I was lying for attention. The host responded by playing audio from my father's disability hearing, where he claimed he couldn't walk, followed by footage from the same day showing him carrying a refrigerator up a flight of stairs. The interview dissolved into profanity and threats. The heavily censored broadcast became a viral meme. The IRS auction was held that Saturday. I attended with cash, determined to reclaim anything that had belonged to my mother. The auctioneer recognized me from the news and quietly ensured that every item of sentimental value went to me for the minimum bid. My mother's china set, $1. Her wedding album, $1. The rocking chair where she had held us as children, $1. Other bidders began stepping back, allowing me to recover pieces of my past. A woman in the crowd wept openly and later hugged me, whispering that my mother would be proud. My father watched from his car, barred from approaching by the restraining order. He could only witness his life being dismantled piece by piece. Financial ruin followed swiftly. The IRS demanded $600,000. Social Security sought $230,000. The trust fund judgment totaled $1 million. His debt exceeded $3 million. Bankruptcy offered no escape. Fraud judgments cannot be discharged. Prosecutors pursued a 15-year sentence. Barbara accepted a plea deal and provided further evidence against him. Jake received probation and wage garnishment, forced into steady work for the first time in his life. Even my father's secret family in Florida filed their own lawsuit after discovering his deception. And through it all, my life continued to rise. My business surpassed its first million in revenue. I celebrated by taking Mrs. Chen to the finest restaurant in the city, the same place my father once claimed was beyond our means. We toasted with champagne to justice and to survival. 2 months after that slap in the hospital, my father stood in court wearing an orange jumpsuit, aged and broken. The charges, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, elder abuse, were overwhelming. The judge reviewed the evidence, the hospital footage, the financial records, and the testimony. The sentence was 15 years. When given the chance to speak, I told the court about everything, about the years of struggle, the betrayal, the night he left me bleeding on a hospital floor. But I also spoke about rebuilding my life, about my business, about the foundation I was creating to help others escape financial abuse. I looked directly at him and said, "You tried to bury me, not knowing I was a seed. Now watch me grow." And with that, the chapter of his control over my life finally ended.